Good evening. Thank you for coming to the MEPA consultation session. My name is Erin Flaherty. I'm from the MEPA office. MEPA stands for the Mass Environmental Policy Act office. We conduct reviews of development projects that require some kind of state agency action and exceeds one of our thresholds. So I'm just going to briefly go over the MEPA process, why this project is subject to the MEPA process, and then I'm going to turn it over to the project proponent. So we've put together a general timeline. So to give an opportunity to folks to, I'll say something if they have comments, questions, and give the proponent an opportunity to respond to those questions or comments. We do have some meeting ground rules. We just want to stay on schedule and give everyone an opportunity to say what they have to say. We want to be respectful of what everyone has to say and be courteous and patient. We want to keep talking to one person at a time to be respectful and refrain from side conversations so we can focus on the speaker. So what is MEPA? So MEPA is the Mass Environmental Policy Act office. It's not a permitting process. It doesn't approve or deny projects. It requires that state agencies, permitting agencies, study the environmental impacts of projects they're permitting and make sure it ensures that project proponents take all the steps they can feasible to avoid, minimize, and mitigate damage to the environment. So MEPA is really a public disclosure process, and it requires the review of feasible alternatives and the development of feasible mitigation measures. So MEPA review is required when two criteria are met. So there first has to be some kind of state agency action, so in the form of a permit, license, land transfer, or financial assistance. And then also the project needs to exceed one of the thresholds outlined in the MEPA regulations. And so the purpose of tonight is to learn about the project. Thank you. Okay, so the purpose of tonight is to go over existing conditions, get a general overview of the project, and then we're going to have an opportunity for questions and comments. But it's not a formal hearing, so your comments won't be recorded. You have to submit them to the MEPA office. So I do have contact information later on that will appear up here, and there's also handouts out front with my contact information. So let's see. So just to go over this project timeline, the ENF was submitted to the MEPA office on May 31st. It was published on June 10th, and that's when the review period officially begins. There's a 20-day public comment period, and then that ends on July 1st. And then the certificate is issued 10 days later. Once the certificate is issued, the project can move forward to permitting. That is, if the comment period isn't extended. So this is the information to submit comments to me and Secretary Theorides. This information is all available on the MEPA website. There's also handouts in the front of the hall that you can take home. All right, now I'm going to pass the presentation over to Briscoe Lang, who's the project representative. Oh, sorry.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Briscoe Lang. I'm an environmental scientist with PAR Corporation. I'm sorry. My name is Briscoe Lang. I'm an environmental scientist with PAR Corporation. PAR Corporation was responsible primarily for working with the other project team members to prepare the ENF that's currently under review. And so I've been asked to start off this presentation by introducing our project team. And with me tonight is Tim McKay from Northeastern University, representing NU. We have Bob Schaffner from Payette Architects, the architect for the Coastal Sustainability Institute, Rick Gallett and Dale Leavitt from TAG Engineering, who primarily worked on the seawater component of the project. So this ENF documents the environmental impacts, alternatives, and mitigation associated with the proposed CSI development. And that includes the expansion of the Murphy bunker for the CSI building itself, upgrades to the seawater system, and associated site improvements to support those activities. You may recall that an earlier ENF submitted in January of 2018 addressed only the repairs and upgrades to the seawater system. Following a scoping session at the Murphy bunker and subsequent public comment and agency comment, that ENF was withdrawn without prejudice. And we are back in front of you tonight with this scoping session for the new ENF. So program modifications and refinements that have been made since 2018 include a reduction in the proposed seawater inflow rate from 2,400 gallons down to 600 gallons per minute. Northeastern has eliminated entirely the proposal to utilize seawater for indirect building heating and cooling. The proposed seawater outfall has been modified to eliminate the outfall through the bathing beach seawall that currently takes the seawater discharge and now discharge that seawater offshore through a diffuser system. We've also eliminated a temporary disturbance to a small bordering vegetated wetland on the site. And we propose some substantial mitigation, including a on-site lobster hatchery that Mr. Gallagher will get into in a little bit. In the interim between the 2018 ENF and the current ENF, Northeastern has undertaken a number of studies, environmental studies, including water temperature monitoring throughout the cove. They've calculated estimates of larval lobster entrapment associated with the currently proposed seawater system. They ran a core mix model at the request of EPA and DEP, and the core mix model models pollutant, in this case thermal, dissipation in the water column. And they've also performed traffic studies in Nahat to estimate current and future traffic conditions. I just want to do a quick, brief discussion of existing site conditions, locations and features of major facilities on the site, site drainage, some discussion of the existing vegetation and the wetland resource areas. You all know the site, I'm presuming. You see the Swallow Cave Road to the west, Nahant Road to the north. North of that is Canoe Beach. The large grassed area in the center of the site, east of which is the Murphy bunker, which is subsurface or buried. The Edwards Lab to the left, Bathing Beach down to the south, and then the town's Lodge Park over at the northeast. The wetland resource areas on the site are shown on this graphic in colors. The swath going through the center of the site is land subject to coastal storm flow, basically 100-year floodplain. There's a coastal beach on the north and south sides, Canoe Beach, Bathing Beach. There's a coastal bank, which encircles essentially the entire site. And there's land under the ocean, obviously, underneath the subtidal portions of the water. On site currently, there are a total of 26 parking spaces, including and driveways as well. There's minimal drainage infrastructure with nope, can't get it to go. The majority of the site drains internally into the large grass area in the central portion of the site. When that fills up and overflows, it flows north onto Canoe Beach. The developed portions of the site, portions are collected in a subsurface drainage system, discharged to the bordering vegetated wetland to the east of the, thank you very much, east of the Edwards Lab, and then ultimately discharged at the 15-inch pipe that exits at the seawall on Bathing Beach. There are no Natural Heritage Program estimated or priority habitats mapped on this site. The site is not part of or located in an area of critical environmental concern, and the waters surrounding the site are not classified as outstanding resource waters by the Commonwealth. So with that brief, introduction, I'd like to turn it over to Mr. Gallett, talk about the existing seawater system. After Mr. Gallett is up, we'll have Bob from Payette to talk about the proposed Coastal Sustainability Institute, after which Rick will get up and tell you a little more about the proposed seawater system, and then Tim from Northeastern will talk about permitting, construction timeline, and mitigation.
Sure. Hi, thank you, everyone. As Briscoe alluded to, my name is Rick Gallett. I work for TAG Engineering. We are seawater system designers, and we've been doing this as a company for 20 years, but I've been designing seawater systems for over 35 years. This is a passion of mine. I was hired by Northeastern some 2 or 3 years ago because they had a problem. So I first came to here because they didn't have the ability to pump any seawater out of the ocean because mussels were impinging and growing inside the pipe. So I came here first to solve a problem, and I've been here helping them for such a long time. This project rolled into it, so that's kind of my history. I think you all are kind of familiar with the site. I know some of you walked the site today, and when you look out from Bathing Beach and the seawall, you can see some existing precast concrete structures that are holding pipes that are often exposed at extreme low tides in place. And so one of the goals of this project is to replace those, and mainly because they're failing. They're failing because they're not reliable. If any of you know anything about marine projects and research, stability is the key to success in obtaining good data. And one of the problems they've been having is that these pipes often become plugged to the point that they don't yield any flow rates within a matter of 4 to 6 weeks during the warmer parts of the month because they're so impinged with mussels. So right now there's a little pump house that kind of looks like a triangle at the seawall. You've probably seen it. Well, unfortunately, there's some properties about pumps that they don't like to suck seawater. They like to pump it up large and high distances, but they're very poor at grabbing seawater on the suction side of a pump. So the reason that pump house is there and so close to the ocean is to minimize the amount of what we call suction pressure that these pumps are facing up against. So they're not only close to the seawall, but they're way down. They're down about 15 feet. And I think if we were to be truthful for ourselves, the maintenance guys are being, asked to do a lot by having to go down into this very deep pit and maintain these pumps in a relatively unsafe condition. So one of our goals is to make this a much more safer operation for the people who are doing the maintenance for them. Right now, what the pumps do is they grab water out of the ocean, and up and to the right, as you're looking at the ocean, there's a large green building, and that has 2 storage tanks that store about 20,000 gallons of seawater. And what they do is they kind of balance off or buffer the flow. So if the lab all of a sudden needed a little more flow, it kind of drops down the level while the pumps are trying to make it up. So it's kind of a buffering system. It also serves as a means to kind of let some of the solids that are entrained in the water, we call them the TSS, the total soluble solids, or the settleable solids that might be in the water, kind of settle out before they get to the lab. So there's no mechanical filtration at this time to give them some of the water quality that they're interested in. And then what it does from that head tank is it feeds by gravity into the labs. And and that's nice, maybe about 10 pounds of pressure, which is pretty much ideal. But the problem also there is the way they designed the system. They did single lines to each of the labs. So what happens is the mussels that are also in the suction lines start getting in the discharge lines, and they start growing in there and collapsing the flow down to almost nothing. So we need to address that situation for them too. So originally, that seawater system was supposed to deliver about 550 gallons a minute per pump, and they have 2 pumps there. Well, in actuality, because of all the problems they have about a daily average flow of running those pumps full speed of about 300 gallons a minute. And that, although it sounds like a lot to you, it's not a lot to research, because what you're trying to do is maintain these animals in a near ambient, what we call ambient ocean conditions. So it's like these animals are living in the ocean, but yet they're in a tank. You're trying to flush any nitrogen compounds that are building up, any sediment that's building up. In some cases, they are actually taking in food, natural phytoplankton that's found in the ocean, and using it as a food source to grow. So as a scientist, it's ideal, the more water you flow through the system, the better off you are. Talking about thermal impacts, the note there, right now, Northeastern does not add any significant heating or cooling to the water compared to the volume of the water. There might be a few individuals who are playing with the 5 or 10 gallons a minute of seawater, but it's negligible. And as Briscoe alluded to, there was what they call a core mix model, which is a very sophisticated model to determine how much temperature rise is in a given receiving body of water based on the flow that's coming back to it, the effluent. And it was really negligible, and it wasn't determined there was any impact until the numbers became like higher than 2,400 gallons a minute and greater than 5 degrees differential. So what we're doing here, what they're doing now, really has no difference on the receiving body water temperature. So I wanted to just point that out. Green is up. All right. So this slide on the right, you can see that's an image that was actually taken at UMass Dartmouth. They call it their SMAS building. And they had similar problems, and almost every marine lab up and down the coast and throughout the country has the same problem. Those are mussels growing on the inside of the pipe. And the thing about mussels is, especially in your nutrient-rich water, they can grow extremely fast, as much as 2 inches in 1 year. So what happens when you only have a 5-inch diameter pipe or a 6-inch diameter pipe, and you start growing 2-inch mussels from every direction? Pretty soon there's nothing left in the middle for the water to flow through. That's suffocating the flow. What also it does for the pumps is it creates a tremendous friction loss. So let's say you have a boat, you like to sail, you like to power boat. You put on a biofouling paint, right, to keep mussels and tunicates and growth from growing on the bottom of your boat. If you don't, you get all that drag, right? You want to keep your bottom as clean as possible, so your drag, you're as efficient as possible. Same thing for seawater systems. We want to get rid of the mussels because they are creating all sorts of friction losses for our pumps and wreaking havoc on them. So that's one of the other missions that we have as a directive to fix. The way we address that is we use 2 lines. And I think I've talked about this before. One line is called the active line. The other line is called the inactive line. You let the active line go for as long as you can, and you're watching gauges on your pumps, and when it reaches a certain pressure loss, you switch to the other system. And what you do is when you switch to the other system, the system you were using, the active system, becomes the inactive line. And what you do is you cut the water flow off to it. When you cut the water flow off to it, you cut the oxygen and you cut the food supply, and the mussels die. And it's you're not using any chemicals to control biofouling like you would for a boat where you're using anti-fouling paint to control biofouling growth. We do it in a very natural type way by just starving them of oxygen. And then when it's time to turn them back on, you flush out the dead mussels. Currently, what they're doing to address this, if any of you have gone by there, they have a dive company that's offshore, and they're using like a rotor-rooter system, and they're jamming it up from the seaward side up the pipe, and breaking up all the mussel shells while backwashing it at the same time in an attempt to clear it. But they're doing this every 4 weeks, and that's disrupting the research and the scientists. So that's something we don't want to be happening down the road. I talked about the mussels creating system capacity loss. The other thing about lots of mussels in the suction line is it rattles the pumps. It's a phenomenon called cavitation. You're actually imploding bubbles on the impeller of the pump, and it's violent, and it destroys the pumps. And I think they go through maybe one pump or a pump every 18 months where they actually destroy to the point it has to be replaced. And these are very expensive seawater pumps that probably cost upwards of $20,000 each. So we need to address that for them and minimize that type of situation. All right, so I guess that's my lecture on the existing seawater system. You all get an A if you... Can I answer that afterwards, Justin? I think that's where this is all leading. I am not sure of the process. You know, basically, from NPDES permits is usually related to animal loading. Like you have aquaculture going on, a lot of animals. Let's say you had a shellfish farm, or you're raising finfish like salmon or something like that. And you have, I think the threshold is like 20,000 pounds of animals in your facility and a significant nitrogen load leaving the facility. Or you have a significant thermal impact on the receiving waters. Those usually dictate NPDES permits.
Actually, it's 1 million gallons, and you guys are going to stay at 864 bushels.
Yeah, I guess they want, do you mind if we answer it later?
Yeah, I would ask if you could suggest that they get that. At one meeting I went to, they said they would do that. So
Okay,
I would like to.
you had that. All right, fine enough. We can ask more later.
Thanks,
All right, sure.
My name is Bob Schaffner with Payette Architects, and I've met you before at other open meetings where we presented the design for the building. Behind me is the site, as you're familiar with, and we talked about the restrictions on the site related to the buffer zones, et cetera, and we very much are concerned about staying within those boundaries. So just to speak a bit about the guiding principles for this project, since it began about 2 years ago. Number one was to integrate it within with the existing bunker research facility. That's the work that was happening in Murphy Bunker. The second was to preserve open space on the site. Third was to locate the building above anticipated future sea level rise. And then finally, that the heightened massing would respond and live within zoning requirements. So the building is currently sited outside of wetlands and floodplain and above the anticipated future sea level rise. The cross-section of the building illustrates the idea that by placing it above the bunker, it not only integrates it with the work that's going on with the bunker, we're also going to be renovating a bit of that space, upgrading some of the research labs down in the bunker. But the main point of this was to build it on top of, in a sense, you've got an existing foundation, so much less disruption of virgin site. As you can see to the right side of the slide, there's a little bit, maybe 20 feet or so of disturbed area, but otherwise most of it sits up on top of the bunker. The reason it does shift to the right on the slide is so that we could serve the building with mechanical infrastructure built underneath it. This was critical to keep the rooftop clear. So the idea is an absolutely flat rooftop that the building is intended to be nearly invisible from either the town side or the Lodge Park side. So by putting the mechanical space here, it was critical to keeping that roof line clean. The final image is the site plan. And a couple of noteworthy things related to the site plan are that We're looking at new or expanded water, sewer, gas, electric, and telecommunication utilities done, completed within already previously disturbed areas. We also have a new stormwater management system designed in accordance with the Mass DEP stormwater management standards. We have ecological improvements proposed to restore and enhance plant and wildlife habitat. We're looking to minimize impact on the East Meadow, and we're staying away entirely from the North Gunport near the coastal zone buffer. We're looking to screen the building largely on both the east and the west, and I think I'll pop back to the cross-section just to remind people that you've got the existing grading on the left side of the slide. That's the part that aims towards town. And on the right side, we're looking to grade up near the base of that floor level so that we can put the proper planting in to do screening on that side as well, so that from Lodge Park, the building becomes largely invisible. We also are aiming to achieve a LEED Gold certification for this project. The university is quite concerned about and very interested in maintaining a strong, environmentally sustainable project. We're looking at, in order to achieve that, we're looking at geothermal heating and cooling. And what this does is it eliminates the need for outdoor cooling towers and gas-fired boilers, which reduces the both visual and auditory challenges that come with those kind of systems. The wells would be located in the meadow, and they would be out of the floodplain. And then once installed, those wells will be invisible, and the area will be available for natural planting or green space above. The parking is in compliance with Nahant zoning requirements, and you can see that it illustrates a north and a south parking area to accommodate those cars. I think that's it. Okay, Rick, you're back.
Oops, my note. Sure. Okay, so what are we trying to do for them? Well, as Briscoe alluded to, last time we came around, the request for is about 2,400 gallons a minute, which I think upset quite a few people, maybe rightfully so. So everything's gotten ratcheted down a lot. We're now asking for about 600 gallons a minute. And that's about in line with where they are now. I mean, if the pumps were working properly, they would be pumping at 550 gallons a minute, so we're just up about 10%. We're also putting in some new intake lines, and the reason is the existing lines cannot be reused. They're the wrong size. It's a maintenance nightmare. It will never work for them. So we need to replace those with something that will work, and the promise is that we'll take out the existing lines that don't work. So I think that's like a one-for-one swap. A lot of you people object to the appearance of the seawater lines as they go under the seawall and then they appear up on the beach during low tide. That will disappear because we're going to directionally bore the seawater lines till they can't be seen under the lowest of tides, and then they'll make an appearance and appear on the bottom of the ocean. They'll run out to the intake structures in a different location than the existing seawater structures because we can't disturb the seawater lines until the new ones are operational. So they're heading off in a different direction, so there's no disturbance of the existing system. The other thing that you should be aware of is this system is going to draw in fewer animals than the existing system. Here's the reason why. Let me just jump ahead for a sec. It all has to do with intake velocity. And the reason is these little critters are floating around or swimming around the ocean, kind of doing their thing. And if you have a high intake velocity, it's going to grab them. It's like a vacuum cleaner. When you take a vacuum cleaner's nozzle and you stick it close to the dirt, it draws in that dirt, and everybody's happy. Well, intake system is the same thing, but you want to design it with the lowest intake velocity as possible. So basically, things that are swimming are going to swim by it. And things that get really close to it and can't swim, yeah, they'll probably get drawn in by the system. But one of the biggest concerns was the lobstermen. They were concerned that we were inhaling their planktonic lobster larvae. We did a lot of research, my partner Dale and I, on this very issue to educate ourselves as best possible. And what we learned about lobster larvae is they have 4 primary stages before what they call settle out into the gravel or into the bottom. Stage 1 is after they hatch. So the female's carrying the eggs, they hatch, and what the first thing they do is they're attracted to sunlight. So they swim all the way up to the surface. And for the first maybe week or 10 days, they stay at the surface. So with this system on the bottom, they can't be inhaled. And this is first stage is when they don't swim very fast at all. Then they go into a second stage and a third stage, and each time they're going into a different stage, they're molting. Almost like a butterfly goes through different stages. It's a caterpillar, then it becomes a chrysalis, then it becomes a moth or a butterfly. There's different stages that these things are doing, and when they're molting, they're either going up and down in the column in stage 2 and 3. But when they go to stage 4, they go back up to the surface. So again, during stage 4, they can't be inhaled by the intakes. But what we've tried to do here, unlike the existing system, is minimize that slot capture velocity. So that's right in the core of that intake. There's some slots. And you try to put enough slots in there so you're evenly spreading out the intake velocity. So it's not like a vacuum cleaner nozzle where you're going like this. It's spread out over a huge area, or as large an area as possible, so that it's a minimum intake velocity. The other thing that regulatory people are worried about is what's called impingement velocity. And the impingement is on the mesh screen that surrounds and protects the intake. That mesh is usually about 1/2-inch mesh. And what you don't want to do there is capture things that will mostly affect the pump, but it's like little fish, jellyfish, could be seaweed. And what you don't want to do is have that come by and all of a sudden grab and get impinged on the mesh that's surrounding the intake. So that's even significantly less. Environmental regulations are set by the Division of Marine Fisheries that the impingement velocity should be less than 0.5 feet per second, and we're down at about 0.2 feet per second. So we're about 40% of what's allowed by the Division of Marine Fisheries. So we're doing really excellent there. I don't know what the impingement velocity or the capture velocity is of the existing intakes, but I can tell you it's very high in comparison to what we're doing. So it's a benefit not only to the institution, but also to the fishermen in our new tactic and our new design. Okay, going back just a little bit. So can you all see, if you look at the left of the screen, you can kind of see where the existing intakes are. I wish I had a laser pointer, but I don't. Or do I? Okay, what did you push? All right, that's the existing intakes. And they're not really that far from the seawall. They're probably about 300 feet off the shore. And what we're doing is we're taking ours and we're putting them out a little bit further. This nicer water, we have to worry about the surf zone, especially around here. And a lot of the, we're also looking for good, clean bottom structure, so we're not going to get a lot of fouling on this. These are probably 200 feet apart, 150 feet apart from the existing system right now. That right there is probably 100 feet, like further from the beach, 100 feet. Yeah, there's some rocks. When you look from the seawall, you can see some rocks right in here. And then there's another set of rocks further out. Yeah, so it's about, I would say, halfway between the two sets of rocks. Okay. So, reason that we located them there was there's a nice gravelly bottom. It's away from the existing intakes and it's out of the surf zone. So that was the reason that site was selected by us. It also does this kind of circuitous pattern, and that's because there's a lot of bedrock underneath there that we're trying to avoid. Sure.
Your ENF has says 14.
Sure.
It was 20 inches.
It's 14 now because, remember, it used to be 2,400 gallons a minute. It's ratcheted down to 600 gallons a minute. I don't have I don't have it in front of me right now, I apologize. But I can tell you it's 14 inch, okay? It's just proportional to the flow rate. The outfall, okay, right now it goes right through the seawall, and if any of you went on the tour today, you kind of saw it eroding the beach. There was like a little mini Grand Canyon going on there. Well, that's not really favorable. So what we have is this outfall diffuser system, and these, I think I might have a profile. That's right here. So the seawater leaves the laboratory this way, and then it's coming up this way in 4 what we call diffusers or jet nozzles. And what that's supposed to do is aid in the mixing. So rather than a point discharge, which might have an effect in a very small area, this helps diffuse the effluent. And your biggest concern on the effluent was a temperature gradient. And what we had is that core mix model that we talked about earlier. Take a look at this diffuser system and find out what the impact area, let's say if there was a 1 degree water change or a 2 degree water change or a 3 degree water change, what is the impact on that zone? Because some of you were thinking that this outfall system is actually warming the cove, the entire cove, and affecting the lobster habitat there. And we found that that's, I'm sorry, but to say, it's just not true. It has a very minimal effect in that area. And especially now that we've ratcheted all the way down to 600 gallons a minute, the impact is even significantly less. This is a profile view of the intakes offshore, coming up the sand, and then underground and coming out, like I told you, below mean the water, so you'll never see the pipes and the precast concrete structures like you do now into the new pump house. And I know, hang on. I know there's been some comments about, why the new pump house is so large. You know, it's a very big build. Sorry? Did I have it? Why the new pump house is so large. And there's a lot of reasons for it, and the most significant reason is safety. As a designer and an engineer, I'm obligated to make it a safe working atmosphere in place for the people who do the work there. And I have to give offsets. So if you're working on a motor, you have to have 3 or 4 feet of clearance on each side of the motor. And we have 2 pumps for reasons I explained earlier, an active line and an inactive line. So you need this area of safety. And you also have to be able to get equipment in and out. Seawater systems are a lot of maintenance. They're a lot of work for Northeastern as well as any marine institution who operates them. So they're in there almost daily doing some sort of service to the system. So we need to make that a very safe place for the work. So although it looks big, most of the space is access and aisle space and not really for pumps or anything like that. So I just want to make that clear about the size of the pump house. The other thing is above the pump house, I believe, is a dive locker or something like that. And that has its own footprint, so we're just taking the basement of that particular place, which worked out nice for both of us. So I guess that's my dissertation on the new system, and I'll be happy to answer questions later. Oh, except for this gentleman. Sure. Okay. Where?
Right there.
It does say that.
It does.
Yeah.
You guys gotta get it together.
We're trying. All right. Thank you for pointing that out. But it is a 14-inch line. All right, next.
So if we could hold questions, I think that'd be better. I want everybody can hear it after. Thank you. Again, my name is Tim McKay. I'm representing Northeastern in the building process. And I'm going to talk a little bit about permitting next. So obviously that's the reason why we're here tonight is to talk about what step we're on right now and where we're going to go next. So again, this project is still in schematic design. We went back to the drawing boards about a year ago when we came here in December, and we've been working through a lot of your comments, bringing in a lot of engineers to verify some of our findings. So again, we're here tonight to talk about the state's requirement for making a determination about the environmental impact of our building. We have federal regulators as well that are going to be reviewing this process. So in order to begin the municipal permitting process, we need to get through the state and the federal reviews. So that's where we are right now. After that, we send a notice of intent to the Consultation Commission to, again, do their own internal analysis. We've been working with various municipal and state agencies to ensure they have the information they need to do a thorough analysis. And we will not be able to move forward with one part without closing the next. So today we're here to talk about the state requirements. The next step, again, is the notice of intent with the Nahant Conservation Commission, and after we've closed those two processes, we will move forward with municipal building permits. So somebody had mentioned MEPA's permits earlier. We've been working very closely with the DEP and EPA to determine the environmental impacts of our seawater system. As Briscoe and Rick alluded to, we've done temperature and flow rate studies over the last year. In addition to that, we've done bathymetric surveys on the seafloor, and we've done pollutant testing. And a lot of times our pollutants have been below recordable thresholds, and that information is with the DEP and EPA.
So will you need the permit though?
I'm sorry?
Will you need the discharge permit?
So again, the state and federal agencies are currently undergoing their review of our systems right now. So we don't have that answer right now. But certainly we've worked with them in conducting those studies, and we'll continue to work with them as they analyze the impact of our system.
That's something you guys would be open to see? It's only off by 100,000 gallons.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. If the state requests that from us,
That's not my question. No, I'm saying, would you guys be, if you have no problem with
Sure.
the system, that opens it up so they can come in and
if the state requests that from us, we'll discuss that when they make their determination. So I'm sure most of you are aware now, through the MEPA process and their anti-segmentation policy, we've incorporated both of these projects into one ENF. After this step, we'll be dividing it into two notices of intent, or NOIs. So this is the seawater system. Sorry, I should probably read off this so you guys can hear me. So after this step, after the state's made their determination, we'll move forward with the order of conditions with the Nahant Conservation Commission. We'll also be seeking Mass DEP's approval for their waterway license and the Army Corps of Engineers, which is the federal level. So in terms of construction sequence, again, this schedule is in a vacuum, not including any external pressures. Ideally, we would like to begin construction in the winter of 2019. Again, after consulting with our ecologist, their recommendation is that we wait until after migratory birds have left the area to begin any required site clearing. And then, I'm sorry, can you please withhold comments until the comment period? Thank you very much. So after that point, we will have all of the trees required cleared before they return back in the spring. So,
All right, can we hold comments till after the presentation's over?
thank you. After that point, we begin mass earth excavation and foundations, ideally next spring, commencing construction at the same time, with an anticipated final grading and landscaping in the summer of 2021. We will also be conducting the installation of our seawater pipes in early winter 2020, in July of 2020, and that is in line with the Department of Fisheries and Wildlife time of year restriction. We're not allowed to be in the water from February to June, I believe. Right. So mitigation? Yes, sir. I believe we're withholding questions and comments till the end.
Excuse me. You're telling us about everything that's going to happen that you think people think is going to take place. You haven't even talked about the things that we're interested in and why we're sitting here, because we want to know how many people are you planning on bringing in here, how many stories are you going to have, how many cars are you going to try to park, and what's going to happen to our infrastructure in the town we can't take care of now because we live on rock and we can't dig down it deep enough. And if we're going to be bringing in buses loaded with students and so forth, we're going to have problems in this town. And you haven't even addressed one thing that we're sitting here and we're interested in. We want to know how many students you're going to bring in, and what do you think you're going to do on the building height, because every other place you people have built, you have not met the standards that you said you were going to meet, and the people have been here before us telling us we can't believe a word you say.
Thank you. So again, if we could please withhold comments. Can we please get through this presentation? Thank you. Thank you for your comments, sir. Tonight's agenda is to focus on the state.
Yeah,
Sorry.
I'd just like to ask folks once again to please hold their comments until after the presentation is over.
Thank you, Aaron. So we're here to help Aaron and the state understand the environmental impacts of this project. We understand you have your own concerns, but they have theirs as well, and we're hoping to address some of those this evening. So thank you. So for mitigation, obviously we've talked a lot about the habitat improvements. I'm sure you're all aware we've hired an ecologist. The majority of the site has been found to be an invasive species. We're proposing to eradicate those from our project site and undergo a responsible habitat improvement, which would create more biodiversity on site and create better areas for ecological improvement. In addition to that, obviously Briscoe and Rick have talked about the improvements to our stormwater system, which remove the pipes from Bathing Beach, pull the pump house. Oh, sorry, stormwater. Stormwater is now separated from seawater. I'm sure you're all aware. Currently, our stormwater is commingled with seawater and is discharged onto Bathing Beach. The stormwater will be largely dealt with on-site through a series of groundwater recharge systems and brought back to groundwater on-site. We have conducted 2 traffic studies, one last October and one a few weeks ago. We're still analyzing the data from the last traffic study, but the first traffic study, the results were included in the ENF. As part of this project, we're proposing to remove the existing intake lines, and as we install new, as Rick had alluded to, we are proposing to install a lobster hatchery as part of the program for the new building, which would introduce about 90,000 stage 4 lobsters into Nahant Bay. In addition to that, we will continue to monitor all of our systems, our seawater discharge systems, to ensure compliance with state and federal regulators.
All right, so we're going to open it up to questions. What's that?
Sorry? No, we're done with that. We did go over that. The additional assistance to the town, we're currently in negotiations with town administrations working out. Yeah, working out some additional assistance as they move through the permitting process as well. Thank you.
Yep. I just want to remind folks to be wary of the time that they're speaking. Try not to repeat questions so we can get the most meaningful discussion possible.
Okay, I'll be brief. So my first question is, well, let me just make an observation. I don't know if any of you live in this town, but you're telling us how we should live after you do this. 2, has there been an independent environmental review of everything that Northeastern has paid you folks to do? In other words, let me explain, because you're business people, I think. You're being paid by Northeastern to do something and to tell us what you're doing, and we're supposed to believe it. So 1,700 to 2,000 so about 75% of the town at least doesn't believe anything you say. Don't take it personally, okay? But it's the truth, so let's talk about the truth, because this lady, you need the truth. We don't want any expansion in this town. We put in a petition to the president of your organization. So my point here is, the first thing we want is an independent, non-Northeastern subsidized review of the environment, including marine, land, migratory birds, plants, everything you say invasive. I don't know anything about plants, but I know they're beautiful, and I want you killing them, okay? Our only industry is 17 lobstermen's families, and every one of them doesn't want you to do this. Every one of the only industry of this town, those people, okay, don't want you to do it, but you keep telling us about machines. You tell us that mussels are clogging your machines. We don't care. The mussels are clogging your machines because the mussels don't like your machines. So we're not morons, we're really smart, and despite what you think, we're going to stop this.
Hi, I'm Bill Mahoney. I'm a lobsterman, among other things. So my first comment has to do with the size of the pipes again. And, you know, 20, I thought there were 20 when I read them the other day, 14. Also, lobstermen, we suck in water on our boats, and we maintain them. When we get mussels in there, and we have a schedule to clear them, okay? And I think that would be a better thing. With your 6-inch pipes, you can still pull 600, is it 600 you guys want? Okay, last year they wanted 24. So the other thing, reading the MEPA directions are you people are supposed to be talking about end games. Is 600 going to be the amount you have in 10 years, or is this 10 weeks? Is it going to change? Sense of trust that hasn't been developed. Okay, next issue. I'm concerned with the freshwater. What do we call it? Yeah, freshwater zone, the wetlands right there. It appears on the ENF. You guys are going to build that pump house right next to it, and it looks like you're running pipes right through the wetlands. My kids we lived up there. My kids used to come back with salamanders for years, you know, in the spring. You know, is it a vernal pool? It looks like it is to me. So that's a question that I have. And you people hired someone who didn't have the scope. Apparently you didn't pay him enough. He said, I can't deal with that. Yeah. Okay. Okay, the pump house, okay. Oh, Bathing Beach Cove again, you're going to put somewhere between 500 and 700,000 pounds of concrete in there to stabilize those pipes, according to the ENF. And nobody's going to be able to do anything but Northeastern anymore. You know, you can't fish in there. People can't put their trawls in there. You're going to get all hung up. It's basically Bathing Beach Cove is Northeastern now, apparently. How many pounds? How many pounds do you envision to stabilize? Okay, it said 2,500. Well, it said 2,500 on your ENF. And it said 5,000 if you double them up.
Can you answer at the mic?
Bill, right?
Yes.
He asked how heavy the concrete blocks were that holds the
And
pipes
how
down.
many, too?
Yeah, they're about every 20 feet all the way out to the end.
Yeah.
And they're anchored with their weight, the ballast of the weight itself, but also with either helic or threaded rod that's embedded into the bedrock
Yeah.
to thwart the thrust of the surf zone, basically.
Yeah, you can see them at low tide now. You guys promised you'd take them out in 2011, and they're still there. There's 4 pipes in there, not 2 right now. There's 4 because you
Right.
never took out the pipes from 2006.
Understood.
So that's why people are questioning you, because
Right.
you're not doing what you're saying.
Yeah. I think usually things like that are in the, what they call the order of conditions of the permit. If you abide by the rules of the permit, you said you were going to take those pipelines out, you can't get a permit granted until you remove them.
Well, they didn't take them out, and it was in the order of conditions in 2011.
I wasn't there, but I'm here now.
Okay. Canoe Beach, that's another issue.
Yeah.
Been noticing freedom of information. We retrieved some things from Coastal Zone Management. There's a 400 pages worth of material covering Canoe Beach. They tried it in 2016. Some of us old timers noticed, shook our heads saying that's not going to last, the berm. It did not. Lots of money's been spent, taxpayer monies. And again, from what I read with Erin's, the MEPA recitation that I read 2 days ago, you can't segment projects. So Canoe Beach, what are you doing? You've spent 400 pages talking about getting an ENF, but it's not in this present ENF. And if there's financial involvement, you have to do, Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, is it EIR?
So EIRs are required when certain thresholds are exceeded, or there's such thing as a discretionary EIR.
Yeah, it
there's-
says financial assistance. If financial assistance is given by an agency, i.e.
That's-
Coastal Zone
so-
Management,
That's considered a state agency action, so the criteria that needs to be met is that there has to be a state agency action and a related threshold. That's exceeded doesn't necessarily mean an EIR is mandatory.
my impression is that a state action, Coastal Zone Management has been
Yeah.
involved.
Yeah,
And
you're
for the
correct.
life of me, there's velocity zones of 36 feet right off of Canoe Beach. And if you people are going to spend millions of dollars in your development, I've been around for 70 years. You get a big northeaster, you're in trouble in that area, right there in that flood zone. So
Okay, and
it needs
thank
to
you
happen.
for your comments, and make sure you submit them to the MEPA office, but I want to be conscious and let everyone
Okay.
talk.
I love birds too, and you're going to rip up the whole area behind to the east of there, and that's a shame.
Yeah.
You're done. My name is Jeff Mussman. I live at 15 Tri-Mountain Road here in Nahant. I have 2 questions, one procedural and one highly scientific. I know that extension requests have been made by both the town and the Nahant Preservation Trust. Those extension requests were made as many as 10 days ago in one case. We have 20 days, as I understand it, from Erin to respond. Northeastern has been working on this project for several years. We haven't heard whether Northeastern has agreed, which is what I understand has to happen, to extend the comment period. Tim, can you tell us where we are on that?
So the proponent has up until the comment period due date to request an extension. But as of yet, they haven't indicated that they were going to extend the period. I
Right.
don't know if you
So-
want to
right.
speak to that, Tim?
That both the
request
town
is-
and the High Preservation Trust have requested that the proponent
The request is
request.
still under review by Northeastern administration.
So 10 days ago, I think we can assume now that we're down to 7 days. It is not looking very positive that Northeastern's going to approve that extension, seems to me. And my highly scientific question is, how many people in this room, by standing up, how many people in this room, by standing up, oppose this building? It's hardly unfair, Casey. All right, now, how many Nahanters? Forget it. We don't need to embarrass Casey. Sorry.
Hi, Jeff Thomas, 16 Little Nahant Road. I first have a question. I'm unfamiliar with what the NU Coastal Sustainability Institute is. Can somebody tell me what that is?
That's the building that we're proposing to add on to the Murphy bunker.
Okay, so it's NU is for Northeastern. Can I assume that?
Yes.
Okay. Well, that's all right. Let me proceed. What I see here, somebody already touched on, is that I was expecting, and I think I'm not the only one, that we were going to interact with the Massachusetts Environmental Preservation Agency?
Policy Act.
Policy Act, sorry. And talk about what doesn't work for us. What I've seen so far tonight suggests to me that this is sort of a process of boiling the frog. No offense intended, but it just looks like a lot of reasonableness thrown at us so that we'll just sort of zone out and get into a white space and be reasonable and go right along with you. That is not going to happen. And, you know, the three of you who have spoken, you're all nice people, you're all good at what you do, but I think that somebody sent lieutenants or sergeants or corporals when they should have sent a general, a decision maker. Because we're not interested in hearing about what you want to do. We're interested in preserving this town. This town is virtually completely supported by individual taxpayer revenue. You know, we don't have a state and federal tax base like Lynn. We don't have a commercial base like Swampscott, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And right now, we're going to have to raise taxes to fix things like roads. Then it looks like we're going to see for the next 2 years construction vehicles destroying those roads. There was one construction vehicle down here tonight at the site which had the police had to block off a road, and it took 5 minutes with assistance of the police to get that vehicle around one corner so that it could get out. I can only imagine where the granite ledge is often a foot or 2 feet below the surface, what's going to happen when you have multi-ton construction vehicles going back and forth for 2 years. It's not only going to destroy the roads, it's going to destroy the character of the town, because the town is not going to be able to afford it. It's not just the animal habitat you will be destroying, which, by the way, if you chop down 10,000 trees or 1,000 trees and plant some new trees, that doesn't mean all the birds are going to come back and nest the next year. I don't think it works out. This is why, see, we're up against a wall here. We're not going to be like the indigenous people in Manhattan where you hand us $24 worth of trinkets. The selectmen are already negotiating, from what I understand, to accept $6 million over 40 years, which will amount to some fraction of 1% of our town budget, much less compensate for the damage or the other needs that we have. So I'll tell you, if this is going to come down to money, which it appears to be, that's what it's all about, because, let me use an analogy, our ability to pay for the sustainability of this town is not going to keep pace with the cost of the sustainability of this town, just the way that the ability of parents is not keeping pace with the increases in college tuition when it's costing $250,000 for 4 years. All money in Northeastern's pockets. So if this is all about the money, start thinking about a crooked number with 9 zeros in front of it. That might get our attention.
Hi, I'm Brendan Baronic Olmsted, 2 Summer Street in Haunt, Mass. I was watching at home, but unfortunately the audio is totally messed up so that no one at home has been able to hear any of this presentation. So you should be aware of that. In terms of actual public participation, it's only been the people in this room that have heard your presentation. I do have a number of questions, but I'm going to primarily submit them in paper. But there was a couple I did want to see if I can get a more immediate response. Given Northeastern took over the property in the 1970s, will there be an environmental investigation conducted to assess any residual contamination from the former military activities? Yes, no?
We will obtain any permits required by state or municipal agencies.
Okay. What level of environmental remediation efforts is Northeastern committed to should they find additional contamination?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that? I couldn't hear you.
What level of environmental remediation effort is Northeastern committed to should they find additional contamination?
We're committed to whatever the state and federal agencies find.
Okay. Will there be geophysical surveys done prior to construction to determine if there's any subsurface anomalies, such as unexploited ordnance or burial pits for military activity?
We're going to have to consult with our engineers on that one.
Because you do realize that was gun emplacements and they did have large artillery shells. And military, I've worked on a number of military bases, they have a habit of just digging a hole and burying stuff. So just want to ensure that you guys are checking for that.
Your engineer is here.
Now I'll skip to just a few of the other. Since I couldn't hear anything about the lobster hatcheries, this question may have already been answered. But as the local ambient water temperatures increase, local lobster populations are expected to migrate north. How is Northeastern proposed hatchery system going to compensate for change in species?
We've committed to what we've written down in the
Mid-Atlantic species would be moving up north, and our current species would be moving up to Canada. Because we are talking 20 to 100 years, our temperature is going to increase. Could you speak into the mic, please?
That's a very interesting question, actually. So, yes, as the lobster that are presently in this location move north and the lobster from the south move up, I think new broodstock would be brought into the hatchery that would be more adaptive to the environmental conditions as water's warm. It's happening. There's a lot of impetus to stop it, but I think that's a very interesting point that you just brought up.
But I would assume you'd have to anticipate at some point a change in species. So the system you put in now, you'd want to build it out in order to handle that compensation instead of having to gut it and replace it.
Yes, that is correct. So, I mean, the basic system of a hatchery is pretty much the same. It's about water coming in, manipulating the temperature to adapt to the species you're trying to maintain. and then and discharging it out. So it's adjustments in the environmental conditions inside the hatchery, which is pretty simple and it's not usually a gut job.
Okay. I'll move on to the next one. Given New England's weather forecasts can change dramatically in hours, such as the 92 no-name storm, what contingency plan does Northeastern have for housing and caring for students and staff should they be unable to evacuate Nahant due to a causeway flooding?
So if I can just keep the conversation focused on what the environmental impacts this building has
Well,
on the
that's
site.
actually, the next point I'm asking about is, given the location of the building, is it going to be considered a sufficient safe harbor for all that students and staff? Are you going to have to evacuate from that spot and go to somewhere else in Nahant in order to be safe to ride out the storm until you can leave the island?
I believe it to be as safe as any other commercial property in Nahant.
That's not exactly. I'll get to the last two questions I have. From what I understand, there'd be a geothermal system potentially put in. Now, given that we are in a potential seismic area, what level of seismic mitigation has been anticipated, and whether or not, what level of, how many wells could you lose, or percentage of damage can the system take before you would have to basically replace wells, or abandon the system, or completely, gut the system?
So we are currently undergoing geotechnical analysis. That was what some of the trucks were up there for today, and that's going to be ongoing in the next few weeks.
Okay. Sir, my last question, the Department of Energy just in the last 2 weeks has released a study about geothermal potential across the United States. The New England area at about the depth of 7 kilometers was put in about 75 degrees Celsius to maybe up to 175 degrees Celsius. How does that temperature range impact the capacity of your system? Does it mean you have to increase the number of wells? Or can you meet the needs based upon the available heat capacity of the bedrock?
So again, we're still in schematic design for the system. We are currently evaluating. We're doing test wells probably later this summer.
Now, as you're doing those analysis, I think the last question I've got has to deal with the long-term impact. There have been a few studies in some Icelandic geothermal plants that have been operating for 20 to 30 years. In certain bedrock conditions, they have found they've actually decreased the heat capacity over time of the bedrock. Is that going to be part of your analysis?
Again, we're just beginning the design for that system.
Okay. Well, I will submit in paper the rest of my remaining questions.
I'm Lynn Spencer. I live at 15 Tri-Mountain Road. I am speaking here as a longtime member of the Nahant Historical Society and as a concerned member of the Nahant Historical Commission. You've heard about concerns for ecological, environmental, geotechnical. I would like to speak to cultural concerns of this site. As you are very aware, the Murphy Bunker was built as part of the fortifications that protected Boston Harbor during World War II, and indeed had been started before World War II during World War I. So there is a long-time cultural significance to those bunkers and their relationship to the site. But you've also heard about reference to Manhattan and the $24 that bought Manhattan. Many of us in this room look at our town seal and realize that, in fact, Nahant was purchased or in exchange between Black Will and Thomas Dexter, who acquired Nahant. Black Will, like many Native Americans, didn't actually think there was land to be sold. Land was occupied, land was fished, it was hunted, it was a natural resource to be shared. So part of the story of Nahant, in fact, is long-time Native American occupation. So there's also a concern for archaeological resources. Is there any intention beyond the bunker? We understand you're building on top or beside the bunker, but as you look at the geothermal well areas and beyond, are you considering archaeological investigations?
That's a good question. That's a good and an important question as well. And I can tell you that currently the Massachusetts Historical Commission is reviewing this project for potential impacts on state-listed historic and archaeologic properties.
I appreciate that, and I know that to be a very intentional and deliberate review. Thank you very much.
Christian Baudo, 3 Swallow Cave Road. I want to talk about Northeastern's environmental record in Nahant. First of all, you guys have made it clear you think that place is up at East Point, it's full of invasive species. Well, it's just unlivable for anybody, right? Well, tell that to the 10 bird species which are on the Massachusetts list of special birds, endangered birds, species at risk. And I think if you go up there, you look at the record that's publicly available, you'll find a very robust record of those exact birds up in that area. I should also mention that there are invasive species up there. Guess what? You guys have owned that property for 50 years. If anybody was going to look after it and get rid of the invasives, it should have been you. I'd also like to talk about your seawater system. It's not your fault. In 2011, you guys put in your new pipes, and part of the order of conditions provided by the Nahant Conservation Commission was that the old pipes be removed, but they weren't. And this is what happened. In a storm last year, one of your pipes broke up. Here it is. Pieces of it washed up all over the beach, right in front of my house. My neighbors and I collected the pieces. We were very surprised and a bit horrified to find out that this is what Northeastern does in the beaches they study. They just let garbage lie on them. Relevant to the new application for the new seawater pipes, I'd like to know what's going to happen to the old seawater pipes. It says in the ENF they're going to be removed. What about the concrete ballast that hold them to the ground? They're all going to be pulled up, really? Honestly, I'm not going to find pieces of concrete washed up on my beach? Okay, I hope so. I'll hold you to it. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marie Pazinski, 36 Swallow Cave Road. And as a neurologist, a physician, and an academic teacher, I fully appreciate the value of scientific research. However, research needs to be done responsibly and should uphold the mission of the institution. So my question to the president of Northeastern and the Board of Trustees is how, as the leaders of an institution that claims to promote coastal sustainability, how in good conscience can you construct a facility that will destroy the very coastal environments you claim you want to protect? Consider the massive devastation the construction will incur on our town. It will require massive construction vehicles trucking in and out of Nahant over years. The bunker and surrounding area would be denuded of trees and foliage. It will annihilate the abundant wildlife, the natural habitats of the birds and all the wildlife in that area, as well as destroy the very fragile coastal wetlands. It also will forever desecrate the natural beauty of East Point. The increase in their carbon footprint is going to be enormous when you consider not only these massive construction trucks going in and out of Nahant over years, but the influx of cars and buses bringing students and faculties to our town. And not to mention, a 60,000 square foot building is going to require a lot of delivery trucks coming up regularly, bringing supplies. It's a huge unnecessary carbon footprint when you think about it. Just think about the traffic. You're trucking 2 miles out into the Atlantic from the mainland, bringing this big carbon footprint out here. If Northeastern really wants to be a leader and a role model of sustainability, they would be mindful of their own carbon footprint, not increase it logarithmically. They would nurture the existing wildlife refuge and marine habitats of Nahant, not destroy them. True leaders in coastal sustainability would find an innovative way to perform their research that would not destroy one of the few remaining undeveloped headlands in New England.
I'm Susan Solomon. I live at 5 Wendell Road, and my comments and questions really have to do with the basic one that follows up really on some of the things other people have said. Why a 55,000 square foot building is actually needed in a natural resource area seems to me to be the first question that we ought to be asking. And to do that, we have to look at the kind of information that we've gotten from Northeastern, which has been constantly shifting and changing. Among the concerns that I think have never been adequately answered is how many full-time equivalent FTE employees are currently using the space they have, and who and how many are going to occupy the proposed building in this very large square footage. And that's standard in academic planning. I'm an academic myself. It clearly bears on the traffic impacts on the town as well as all the environmental impacts. So if a much smaller building, perhaps in the existing footprint, would do for the needs as presented, we're dealing with a very different question. In the first set of FAQs that was sent in letters to Nahant residents, and actually is still posted on the web the last time I looked, probably after I give this speech they'll take it down. They first claimed that the 55,000 square foot building would serve only 36 new staff. 36 people in 55,000 square feet. My gosh, that is a ratio of square footage per person that is about 7 times standard academic figures in similar research setting. It's not a question of, hey, we're marine, we need all these tanks and stuff. That's not the issue. So after we posed that, and I just really want the lady from MEPA, and I apologize for forgetting your name, to know how much they've changed their numbers as this has gone on. It speaks to the dishonesty, it speaks to the disrespect for the town, it speaks to why there should be a third-party review of everything that they're telling you. After we pointed this out, they then upped their numbers with a very significant number of added students and a few additional staff. We've asked whether any of these staff and faculty that are already there are part-time. We've never been given an answer to that. We want to know how many FTEs we're talking about, full-time equivalent employees. We know from previous material you've given us that the students only come 2 or 3 days a week. So they're at best half-time. They should be spending some of their time in class. So from the research point of view, that might be a reduction. Also, it's clear from the material that's available that some of them are undergraduates who are only present in the spring semester, a further reduction in the FTEs. So when you factor all that in, the information that they gave us in their communication of January 31st, 2019, which was an answer to the questions we had posed, still does not give you a number of FTEs per square feet that has any relationship to what it should be for a building of that size. So then we wonder, well, what purpose does this building actually serve? Maybe it's not what they've been telling us at all. So since they haven't been forthcoming, we spent some time on the web. My friend Alice Court and I have worked on this. And by reviewing their website, we learned that they've situated the Ocean Genome Legacy Project at Ocean Genome Legacy Center, OGL. And I'm not against that project. I think it's probably very good science. I'm an environmental scientist, actually, myself. I've spent my life studying the planet, so that's why I'm so surprised by everything they've told us. While it's a nonprofit, they have lots of collaborators listed, they collect samples sent in from all around the world, and they store them. So why does a storage facility have to be located in the smallest town in Massachusetts and within a nature preserve? Why don't you just move that storage off and use that space for the square footage that you need for any new activities that you have in mind? Unanswered questions relating to the ENF, in my opinion, are what's the purpose of the massive expansion? They've always talked about convening groups of experts and partnerships. We've asked, who are you convening? And what kind of partnerships? We've never gotten an answer to those questions either. What are the safety implications of receiving and storing marine specimens from around the world, including potentially invasive species, certainly, in a seaside facility with the possibility of increased flooding in the future? You know, we ducked the bullet on Hurricane Sandy, but it could have been here. How many people are going to be convened in this facility, including those who might participate in outdoor activities, outdoor parties, perhaps? And what would be the traffic and environmental impacts of all of those conventions that are going to happen in that outdoor space? How many partners are going to visit? How often? What's going to be the traffic and environmental impacts of those partnerships? We've never received any answers to those questions. We've also asked Northeastern why they can't expand in their current footprint to avoid despoiling what to us is a very important natural resource area. This is my last part. Their reply and the statement regarding this in the ENF, we believe, is disingenuous. They state, oh, the current building cannot structurally be added to. It can't support any additional levels. But you know, modern projects in other locations have been able to build up and over a structure in such cases. That's what they did at Mass Ioneer, for example. I urge you to call in a qualified third party to evaluate whether the project can proceed without despoiling wild spaces, build where they already are. We don't see an answer to that, and we want to know that answer. And we want to know the answers to who is going to be there, why is all this space needed. Thank you.
Hi. All right, so we have about it's 7:30 now, so I just want to remind people to be conscious of how much time they're up at the mic so everyone can get a chance to talk.
My name is Alice Cord. I live at 7 Valley Road. I've read the ENF statements. I went on the site tour today, and I have a couple of other comments. Very briefly, the geothermal wells, the seismic activity was mentioned. I had asked when we were on the site visit, how many geothermal wells are you going to be drilling? And then there was no answer, very vague. We don't know, we're going to look into it. And someone else said 50, 100, and the answer was less than 100. So this is clearly a part that is still under very much evaluation, and I think before there's a stamp of approval on this whole thing. My understanding is that East Point is one of the few places where an actual fault line is actually visible above the sea. So this geothermal well drilling will be presumably occurring right on a fault line. I was told, well, that wasn't really important for a lead project. And okay, I'm surprised, but maybe that's something to consider. What's the damage that's done of the stability of geothermal wells if they are being drilled into an actual fault line? Similarly, I found in looking into these things that East Point is also one of only a very small number of fossil sites from the Weymouth Formation, which is they are primarily Cambrian mudstones and limestones from about 530 to 525 million years old. And these are the earliest signs of life that my understanding is there are only a few between Newfoundland and South Carolina that are visible on the East Coast. This is the fossil record that's out at East Point, right where you're going to be drilling for your geothermal wells and the other invasion of the rock at that location. So my question is, have you had a geologist look into this? Is this something that's worth destroying so that you can do a project that we all have doubts that you need to do anyhow? I had a question. Mr. Mahoney had asked about the pipes for the water intake system. You showed us that 6-inch pipes have a maximum draw of 550 gallons per minute, and your goal is just to have a stability of 600 gallons per minute. And one question that had come up but didn't specifically get answered is, so you're putting in 2 14-inch pipes, so with that pipe system, what I want to know is what's the maximum gallons per minute that can be drawn through those pipes in that pump system? Because clearly we have a lot of suspicion about once a pipe system and pump system is put into place, Northeastern will do what it did previously, which is activate 2 systems simultaneously to get what they want. You gave us in the ENF the average draw, but clearly there's a lot of range in that limitation. So if I started to do the math about areas of pipe surface and so forth, maybe it's a bummer that you have to clean your pipes more often, but that's what we all kind of have to do. So.
That was a good question. So basically the problem is what they've been doing is interrupting the research, right? So every 4 weeks or 6 weeks, they have to stop what they're doing and clean the pipes. It takes well, I'm just telling you how it is. And I admit, if you don't do it for a living, it sounds like it's not a big deal. But when you have living animals that you're trying to keep alive and you're trying to get data that means something either to your career as a grad student or a PhD candidate, that data is very important to you, all right? So you go out and get lobsters, that's important to you. Data is important to a researcher, okay? So being respectful of that. What happens with the 14-inch pipe is if you want to go all the way from the spring to the fall without disruption, so that's really the research season around here. That's when things are growing, the water's warm enough to conduct research. The pipe is slowly closing in by the mussels all that time. And the other thing it's doing, it's becoming very rough in there. That smooth pipe that you started out with, that nice clean area that probably had a lot more capacity in it in the spring, now has full of mussels and there's a lot of turbulence and you can't get the same volume of water.
Okay, but
so
that's
we
not
plan
my question.
we plan for the worst scenario as that pipeline's being used.
Right, but my question really has to do is when you're talking about the studies that evaluate a 600 gallon per minute flow, what is the maximum flow that you can create early in the spring when your pipes are clean? And are you studying the damage that that amount of flow is going to do to the environment?
Well, the pump, it's all ends up at the pump. So it all starts out big pipe, but then when it enters the pump, it all drops down to a very small size to enter the throat of the pump. So you might say, oh, well, you can put 1,500 gallons a minute through it. No, you can't. The limit is as you get into the restriction of the suction side of the pump. So it's really...
So you're saying that it's pump specific rather than pipe specific.
Okay.
So then if you change your pumps, then you get a different amount.
Well, thank you. I understand where you're trying to go with it, and you're trying to lead me in a direction, but...
Well, I'm trying to understand.
Yeah, I know that. So the pipe is sized to allow for amount of biofouling that occurs during a season.
That I get.
Okay. The pump is sized, and it ratcheted down from the early on request for like 2,000, 2,400 gallons a minute to 600 because that was what they were basically pumping now. So no net difference in between the existing system if it was operating properly and what the proposed system would be.
Okay, so what my point is that clearly there's a lot of distrust. So once you have your pipes in and the pumps are in a pump room and none of the citizens of Nahant can see what's happening in that pump room, what if your pump breaks and you say, let's get a better pump. Let's get a bigger pump. Let's get a pump that can move more water,
Yeah.
and then we can, do more.
Yeah, so
Then we're stuck with 14-inch pipes that may be doing a lot more damage. So this is one of the concerns.
I understand
that
your
I
question
have.
and your
There's
point,
line.
but I think we're engineering it for a 600-gallon-a-minute system.
Well,
That's
I
what
know
we've been
that's
asked to do, and that's what we're providing the owner.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And then my last point, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, it was completely different. What were you going to?
Okay?
We've committed to 600 gallons a minute, and we intend to honor that commitment.
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that commitment, but I hope you understand, my last point has to do with Northeastern commitments. So Northeastern, my understanding is that when you purchased the land from the government in 50 years ago, you said it was for a marine science center, which is what's written in the ENF, but you also said that it was for a nature preserve, and for a great many years on your website, you touted that this was a nature preserve that Northeastern was taking care of for the town of Nahant. And that, interestingly enough, is not mentioned in your ENF topics that I read about. So when that happened, when you purchased it, Northeastern committed to providing scholarships as payment in lieu of taxes to the students of Nahant, a couple. It was decades before someone realized that Northeastern had not actually given any scholarships to anybody, and when someone finally said, they said, oh, nobody asked us. So they hadn't given us any. Susan Solomon and I wrote when Vice President Ralph Martin invited us all to write questions that Northeastern would answer, we had quite a long list of questions about what the actual compensation in monetary value or payment in lieu of taxes was to the town of Nahant. When they responded to us 6 weeks after they didn't respond to us, they never sent us a response. They sent a response to the town administrator with answers to some questions. They did not respond to one single one of our questions about what the compensation to the town of Nahant was during those 50 years. So with the various agreements or proposals that we're now currently hearing from Northeastern, so far, in your ENF, you say that Northeastern is committed to compensating Nahant for the work that is done or the compensatory damage or whatever during this process. But of what I've heard of the three proposals that have been listed, there was a proposal to give us payments of $10,000, first a one-time payment, and then something like $50,000 a year for 10 years. Then there was a proposal for like $115,000 for 30 years, and then
Thank
a proposal.
you. Can you wrap it up?
This is the end. The last proposal was for 40 years. So does this building go away in 40 years? What about all the damage that happens after that? And we've already been told it was only a small percentage of the Nahant payments. So we have difficulty with the commitments of Northeastern. Thank you.
Josh Antrim, 267 Nahant Road. I'll be very brief because this was just discussed with Alice and the engineer here, but reading from the ENF, this is very ENF specific. Northeastern currently proposes a 600 GPM system, 75% less than the previously proposed capacity, which was 2,400 GPM. So when I look at a 600 GPM system, a suction side pump, low loss system, about 6 feet a second velocity. So consistent with your numbers, that a 6-inch pipe would be good. A 6-inch unfouled pipe would be good for a 600 GPM system. And I thought about the 2,400 GPM system. From your explanation earlier, I thought you turned one off, that kills off the muscles, and it doesn't interrupt the system or the research if you have two systems you turn on and off. So when I did the calculations for 2,400 GPM, it worked out perfect for 14-inch pipes. So at 5.7 feet per second. So pretty ideal. So my concern is My engineering concern becomes an honesty concern about what happens in the future. When I look at a system that looks perfect for 2400 GPM, admittedly unfouled, it's perfectly sized, and I look at the plans and the ENF of the pump building and see 14-inch pipes coming down, necking down to a 6-inch pipe, going to a little 600 GPM pipe on the floor. I said, that looks like it's set up perfectly for someone to come in and just put in a 2400 GPM pipe, and it's done. Admittedly, changing the screening on the intake for your capture velocities and so on. So I'm suspicious about that what we have here is a 2400 GPM system, and we're trying to pull the wool over MEPA's eyes or the public's eyes, or trying to avoid a permitting issue, EIR, or the one that Justin mentioned earlier. And when Bill Mahoney asked earlier, is it going to stay 600 GPM forever? You didn't answer. So these are my concerns, that it looks like an engineering solution for a 2400 GPM system, and I'm concerned that it's a way of getting your foot in the door, and I think this MEPA application, if independent engineers agree with this, that the MEPA application should be for a 2400 GPM system, not a 600 GPM system. That's all.
Hi, my name is B. Rogers. I don't know that it matters. I live at 44 Pearl Road. And I actually have a question about the way these plans are moving forward. I think I probably should be looking at you. About a year and a half ago, Northeastern made a presentation of a building proposal, and there was quite a lot of negative reaction. I've heard that 1,700 signature petitions cited numerous times, and I think it was as a result of that presentation and that building, I signed it. I would not sign it today, and I might not be the only person in that position. I might sign a similar petition again if, depending on how the building developed, and I guess that's my question. From that first presentation to one a few months ago when the ABC choices were presented, there had been really a lot of mitigation and reduction of the footprint and so on and so forth. I've heard a lot of comments about this is a schematic, we're still pursuing it and stuff. Is there some point at which MEPA or any of the other permitting authorities at the federal, state, local will have a definitive design that will be judged? So we're doing the studies, which of course need to be done. Is there a point in that process where there will be a specific proposal that people can respond to? Because obviously how people react, as I said, that, early petition might not have the same number today, it might be changed in the future, and I'd love to know at what point is there, it's this many square feet above ground, it's this many square feet of mechanicals and stuff, it's this, and so on, like that. So that's my question. It's about the process.
So MEPA review is intended to be done in the preliminary stages of planning, so that the public can participate in it and offer their opinions on reasonable mitigation or alternatives. So if a project changes drastically, if there's a material change, there's language in the MEPA regulations that require the proponent to come back for a notice of project change if state permits haven't been issued for the project yet. So for this project, it needs a Chapter 91 license and a potential superseding order of conditions. So those are the two state permits, and that's really where our jurisdiction lies. So if an aspect of the project, like the seawater intake system or the building changes significantly from what it was reviewed as, then it may need to come back for MEPA for further public disclosure and review. But typically, the changes between MEPA and the permitting process aren't that major, but there are, you know, it's MEPA, the purpose of MEPA isn't supposed to, it doesn't have a final product, but it makes sure that the project's in decent shape to get permitted, that you know, it identifies those outlying issues. Right, and a lot of issues can be dealt with the permitting agencies, but the permitting agencies only have so much authority because they're permitting specific things and not the entire project itself.
My name is Jim Walsh. I live at 33 High Street in Nahant. So it was nice to have you here, Aaron. I understand this is the first time you've been to Nahant. Maybe right now in a kind of a warm room, it's different, but earlier you were up at East Point, and I think you've probably got a sense of what we value. Our friend over here said that what he's here to talk about is the building, the impact of the building on East Point. And for us, a lot of it is not so much that impact, it's the collateral damage. It's the damage to other aspects of life in this community. I'm going to recommend a book for you. Do you know Jane Jacobs? Do you know that name? No. There's a book called Visionary Women, and one of the visionary women that is talked about is Jane Jacobs. Jane Jacobs lived in Greenwich Village, New York. Manhattan was mentioned earlier. She lived in Greenwich Village at a time when Robert Moses, a very powerful guy, decided he wanted to put an 8-lane highway right through the center of Greenwich Village, right through Washington Park. And she organized her community and said, our community is more important than your concrete and steel. We need to preserve us as a community. And I think this is a legitimate concern. It's certainly a concern that we have here. About a year ago, a little over a year ago, we had a big meeting here. And the architect for the building, he announced he was from Marblehead. You know, he understood what our concerns were. And I asked him, I said, you know, if somebody wanted to put a 55,000 or 60,000 square foot building in the middle of Old Town in Marblehead, where would you be? Would you be up there or would you be out here? He didn't answer me. I don't know why. But, right. But it's clear to me that you've had an opportunity to see the natural conditions, you've had an opportunity to see the human element here, and I hope that you will support the fullest possible environmental impact report. And so any decision that is made will be based on information that is very clear, very detailed, and can sustain the kinds of questions we've asked. Earlier, people had asked questions, and they were never answered. Or answers came back, and they were shifting. So that's who we are. We're in Nahant, and I'm glad you're here, and I hope you learned something. Thanks.
Hi, we're that third-party review you've been talking about. We have been retained to take a look at the documents, and I'm Ginny Roach with CDM Smith, and Magdalena.
Yeah, Magdalena Lobstead. I'm a wetland scientist with CDM Smith.
And so I'll talk first just a little bit. I mean, we haven't had a lot of time to look at this yet, but, and therefore the comment extension would be wonderful, but I'll touch on some of the civil engineering aspects, and Magdalena will touch on the wetlands and permitting. So one thing is inconsistencies of information in the documents. particularly with regard to impervious area and stormwater management. And just looking at some of the plans, I went to scale some of them off. It appears that some of the measurements, like the sewer length and some of the impervious areas, say for the parking lots alone are much bigger than the impervious areas. So we'll summarize those in our comments. The impervious area due to new building the increase is listed in the stormwater report as 37,000 square feet. And we've been throwing around 55,000. Now, if you were including the bunker as the impervious area, we were told today that it has 8 feet of soil, and I saw all the vegetation and trees, so I think that's up for discussion. At the back of the stormwater report, there's in red that the final stormwater report will have the geotechnical information, and I assume as a result of what you were doing today. There is concern about doing stormwater infiltration, which is a big part of your stormwater quality treatment. The northernmost parking lot infiltration system is in a rock outcrop area. It's listed as that under the natural resource soils information. So we would like to see how those results came out, because that could be a game changer on the stormwater system. Maggie, you want to touch on?
Yes, there's a lot of inconsistencies and conflicting information in the environmental notification form. One, for instance, which is very significant because what they're proposing now is not permittable under the local wetlands ordinance. The zone AE is mapped as elevation 13, and also keep in mind that that was lowered from 2014 by a LOMAR that was approved in December 2017. It used to be 15 feet up until the LOMAR was approved, and now it's 13 feet. So the effective FEMA map listed as 13 feet. But what they did is they imported the GIS Zone A layers. When you're actually supposed to trace, they have more detailed survey than the FEMA mapping. So they're supposed to trace elevation 13, which actually brings that whole bowl where the BVW is. That is actually land subject to coastal storm flowage. So if you add a 100-foot buffer zone to that, the southern parking lot is in the 100-foot buffer zone to land subject to coastal storm flowage. And under the bylaw, they only allow 5,000 square feet of impervious within land subject to coastal storm flowage. And what they're proposing is close to 19,000 square feet, so it's not permittable under the bylaw. That's one comment. And we are submitting a very detailed letter where everything was with mapping, so you can clearly see the inconsistencies. The other thing was a gentleman earlier brought up the segmentation issue with Canoe Beach. And I have some serious concerns about that as well, because, I don't know, maybe these gentlemen can tell us, what's the status of the restoration of Canoe Beach. But one could maybe anticipate or speculate that, if they're using some kind of hard armor for the coastal bank restoration there, that would require a variance under the Mass Wetlands Protection Act. Maybe they're not, I don't know, but I think that should be answered as part of this ENF. Like, what are they proposing to do? We know that the restoration, the beach nourishment failed. What are they proposing to do? And there's an existing pipe that discharges to Canoe Beach, and they're tying in the stormwater from the northern parking lot, it's treated stormwater by the infiltration system, into that outfall. So I think that there's a real, actually tangible connection. You can touch it. And a variance to the Mass Wetlands Protection Act requires an EIR. It's a mandatory EIR threshold.
My name is Tom Hamilton, 17 Kenny Avenue. These are going to be a little anticlimactic questions, but I have two major concerns. One is on the intake system. I did a little research on the computer, and it looks like there's systems out there that would have no negative effect on larvae or fish eggs or anything like that. I mean, it's not my area, but I think our expectation would be that whatever you do, it's world-class. And just wondered if those were investigated and feasible for this area. The other is I see some RFPs out there for invasive species, and wondered if there's an order of conditions that limits your work with invasive species, and if the discharge might have a need for some kind of residual control or something. Yeah, just those two.
I apologize, but I kind of misunderstood the first question, but the second question on invasive species, research on invasive species, that's a very controlled and regulated sector of research. And under the permits, there would be a, what do they call it? A procedure in which they can hold them, control them, and make sure that they don't escape into the environment. They have to write that all up as part of their research project. So, I think they do that currently as a way of operating their research right now, but certainly would be held responsible for that in this permit. And I forgot the first. I apologize. Yeah, so have I. Yeah, and the problem is the biofouling of intake. So I've seen those structures, they're permanently installed. We all know, if we know anything about the bottom, that the bottom is full of life, and so seaweed, mussels, barnacles, sponges, tunicates will all grow on something that's permanent. The way my design is, it's like a cartridge. They'll dive on the cartridge, remove it from the seabed, take it up on the boat, and bring in a fresh one. So that will be done every time the things are changed out. The structure you're talking about is permanent, will foul, and will probably only have a short period of life. So it's pie in the sky stuff, unfortunately. Otherwise, I'd be using it. Is that okay? All right.
My name's Ann Spurn, 36 Mayolis Road. I'm a professor of landscape architecture and planning at MIT. I've been studying, working in the area of sustainability for over 40 years. Sustainability is more than environmental science. It's about the larger sustainability of a society, in this case, a community. Northeastern proposes to set up a Coastal Sustainability Institute. And we feel in Nahant that our sustainability as a town is at risk as a result. So, I think you should think very seriously about this, because any institute founded on such a contradiction is really, sustainability is a set of values. It's not only about science. And like others have mentioned, we have an infrastructure system. We're a very small town. Our tax base is from our individual property taxes for the most part. We have an aging infrastructure, and we have big problems with our sewer and water lines. And we are really, really concerned about this aspect of our sustainability, as well as our environmental sustainability. So any institute that claims that it's a coastal sustainability institute needs to think more broadly than about marine science or environmental science. And that brings me to another point. My colleague, Susan Solomon, raised the issue of what is the 55,000 square feet going to be used for, because she undertook a study of the Earth and Atmospheric Sciences Department at MIT, her own department. And this far exceeds the entire space allocation, as I understand it, for her department at MIT. So this leads us to question, what is the 55,000 square feet going to be used for? I think all of us have had a good relationship. Well, maybe not all of us. The lobstermen, I hear the concerns of past issues, but many of us go to the open houses at the Marine Science Center and have enjoyed colleagues there and going there and seeing the inside of the bunkers at the annual open house. And I don't think that we really have any great concerns about a small enlargement to have a coastal sustainability institute there if it were, you know, seemed like a reasonable amount of space. But this seems totally unreasonable. And you haven't answered our questions reasonably about what you're going to do with all of this space, given how totally out of whack it is with academic standards for the use of research space and teaching space. So I think I'll stop there, but it's just, there's a contradiction here that's really irks me as someone who has worked on sustainability for so many years. To found an institute like this on such a contradiction doesn't bode well.
Thank you, John Lombard, 14 Fennel Way. I'd keep the birds, and I wouldn't cut any trees down. I think the location is wrong. What you should do, take a footprint of what you have up there. The trailers, take a footprint of that. If it's 15,000 feet, put 2 floors in there. Have it looking right at Egg Rock. And I'd take a picture of the chapel and the library. And that would be the exterior of the building. And put Northeastern Marine Science facing that, put a parking lot up in front or whatever you have to do, and call it a day.
Bruce Walker, Seven Valley Road. I have a question for the architect, and that is, it was good to see the drawings of the buildings there. The question is, are you designing those buildings such that a second story can be put on top of them? And have you been requested by Northeastern to be able to do that? And could a second story be put on them?
No. No, there's no provision whatsoever and no structural capacity for a second floor. It's set up to handle photovoltaic panels, and they're reviewing right now the idea of a green roof on about a third of the area, so it wouldn't have any potential for growth above. And oh, by the way, that wouldn't conform to zoning regulations in Nahant to go any higher.
All right, we're just gonna take, you two are gonna be our last speakers for the night.
Francis Farr, 15 Cliff Street. I just have one request, and that is that I think you should poll your students. I think you should poll the people who actually you're building this school for, because they're the younger generation. And there's one thing I know about the younger generation: they get it. They get it about environmental destruction. And I would suggest to you that they would probably say, we do not need 61,000 square feet of a building.
Hi, Debbie Vanderslice, 368 Nahant Road. I'm going to stay on point. I'm going to be very brief. One thing is an observation for Northeastern. I know you have said and published that the water temperature that is released is not too warm and that it doesn't impact sea life. But I can tell you from my personal experience of my husband and I cleaning that beach for swim for several years now, that when we started cleaning it, we found lobster shells, crab shells, blue mussel shells, lots of them. And I can tell you now, we're lucky if we find 2 shells, 2 blue mussel shells. So you may say it doesn't impact the sea life there. I know you're the scientists and the smart ones, but from my personal experience, I am not seeing any signs of sea life, just a lot of garbage. So the second thing, and this is relevant to the building, perhaps for the architect, I read recently that with buildings such as the bunker, that there's issues with asbestos, that the military, at the time that that bunker was built in 1942 to 1943, was using certain concrete that has asbestos in it. It is not easy to test for. It's not a deliberate thing where you can just take a chunk of concrete. It's more expansive than that. It may be a different kind of material in the ceilings, et cetera. So I'm thinking if you're adding another level, you're gonna somehow have to cut through the concrete for stairs or elevators or whatever. And I know that if there indeed is asbestos there, I'm hoping that you're gonna test for it, because if there's a southeast wind, I'm pretty sure it's gonna blow my way. And then there's others, beautiful children, that live around the corner in a different direction. And obviously asbestos causes cancer. This is a 1 square mile town, and I think it's something that should be looked into and tested for.
We will have an industrial hygienist on site during demolition, and that's common practice in construction.
Who on site?
An industrial hygienist
Who does what?
who tests materials.
Okay, so before you actually start drilling, are the materials tested, or are you gonna wait till you're blasting away?
So that could be destructive testing, and we're just not prepared to do that right now, but certainly as we get closer to the actual activity, we'll bring in those professionals.
Okay, and I really do hope that you start like a Facebook page or something so that you can communicate to residents some of these things we've been talking about tonight. So as things evolve, as you meet our concerns or don't meet our concerns, that we have a way of knowing. Thank you.
Thank you all for coming tonight. Briscoe's gonna put my contact information back up on the slide, so I suggest you submit comments, preferably electronically, to me via email or the MEPA public comment the MEPA public comment portal. Those are the best way to submit the comments. You can also submit hard copies to the address listed up there. Thank you.